I downloaded it to check it out.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
but
the
would you be
paper on the computational strata.
yeah, would you be willing to just t give us some highlights or
Sure,
encapsulate what that's
sure, sure,
about?
sure. Yeah, if you looked at it, it's a pretty mathematical paper, right? But what I wanted to do was basically bring in a couple of key ideas, and the first idea being that, and what we've spoken about quite a bit in the last few sessions, is that light has these implicit properties, and of course, there's if you get a little more intricate, there's different orders of properties. And we can cycle from 1 to 10, and they have different meaning. But if we kind of focus on that configuration of four, um, that equates to presence, power, knowledge, harmony, then there's a correlation between that and how matter emerges based on these fourfold principles of light. And so the thesis in that paper is that these four properties exist in unity inside light, and they are compelled to integrate with each other even when they become external in the material levels. And that compulsion is what creates stability at the material levels, because implicitly those four properties are one. But when you make it explicit at the material level, they seek to maintain that integrity, and that creates stability. And to me, that's the basis of any stable computational strata. So if you're trying to create a computational device, the thesis, what's suggested in that paper, is that it has to be based on this fourfold stability that we see happening automatically or just during the course of emergence at the quantum level or at the atomic level or at the cellular level. There's this fourfoldness, and that's a requirement for that level to maintain its stability. And if we're trying to build computational devices that are not based on that stability, we're going to run into decoherence, tremendous instability. We're going to have to create conditions like what IBM and Google have done with their quantum computers that essentially try and have all that computation occur at absolute zero temperatures almost. So there's a lot of artificial conditions that you have to create in order to have the semblance of stability. But what that paper is saying is that that's all unnecessary if you actually build on inherent stability based on the implicitness of these properties of light.
As you were talking about that, I thought of quantum numbers. And it's
Uh-huh.
something we haven't talked about, but there's four quantum numbers too. Has that
I,
crossed your
I,
mind or
yeah, I've not studied that in a great amount of detail. I mean, I've written a little bit about it, but it's been so long that I've even, yeah, I couldn't really comment on it in any intelligent way. So, yeah.
So, Pravir, what you're saying, based on, because I did read part of your paper, but I don't totally understand it. But what you're saying in your explanation is that you should be able to build a computer like IBM, like Google, that doesn't require the same, that doesn't require the same massive amounts of cooling to function as long as you build it under those properties. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that so if we're talking about the building of quantum computers,
That's cool.
then there's a few different ways to go about
Yeah.
it. But what I'm suggesting is that there's a more efficient, cost-effective way that would be more scalable because it could operate at room temperatures. If you were to build that kind of computational device,
Yeah.
essentially leveraging this fourfold properties of light. That's essentially what it comes down to. Yeah. So yeah.
That's really cool because then you're able to utilize like a larger amount of space without such a huge carbon footprint and such an enormous suck on the energy grid.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Absolutely, Emily. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
That's neat.
Is it impacting also the qubit that you can deal with? Like it's increasing your, how it's, can you elaborate how it's increasing qubit?
Yeah, so qubit, so essentially, well, so there's different devices that or different mechanisms that are the cornerstone of computation. So in digital computation, we have binary, we have bits basically. That flips between 0, 1, but that's all created in an infrastructure that we've created. You know, it's completely logical. It's based on a very comprehensive mathematics, and we're able to know exactly what we want to do. In a qubit that currently is hypothesized to be either in a 0 state, in a 1 state, or anything between a 0 and 1. So essentially, it can be an infinite number of states, but that's only hypothesis because it's based on, if you look at it, it's based on the Copenhagen interpretation, which itself is based on a black box approach of what's happening. So you can never prove it. You know, all you can do is say that, hey, you know, this is how you think things are working, and you're building a computer based on how you think things are working. So qubit is essentially, in my mind, in my perception, and you know, either somebody who's working in quantum computing or quantum physicists may not agree with me, is that it's a completely hypothetical approach to computation that will remain unproven. Okay. However, if the third spin, the spin that I have, and the reason why I went down the path of even bothering about creating a patent for quantum computing, is because the qubit that I'm kind of proposing operates differently. It operates on this fourfold principle, and it's something that is more proven only because we see that's how matter and life emerge. There's already a fourfold structure to it. So it's not impossible to extrapolate that fourfold structure might even exist at the quantum level. And so that's where my bet is, and that's how I've kind of structured the architecture of the computer that I'm proposing would be better served to actually work in the quantum realms. So,
and it still has the flexibility of getting infinite numbers between 0 and 1, yeah?
I mean, yes, there's still, there would still be tremendous flexibility, yes, but it would operate differently. So the math is different. It's not probabilistic, it's not statistical oriented. And if you look at any of contemporary math, or the math that's imagined to operate at the quantum level, it's all based on probability and statistics. But the math that I'm proposing is different. You know, I call it the fourfold math of mathematics of light, essentially. And that's the 10 books that I've written and kind of try to elaborate a framework for math that's different than what's happening at the quantum level. I mean, it's different than interpretations of what's happening at the quantum level if you look at today's interpretations. And so it's if the whole quantum industry is turning left, I'm turning right and saying that this is the way you got to do it, you know, rather than what everybody else is doing. So, you know, again, needs to be proven out, but that's kind of the bet. That's where I'm placing kind of my eggs, if you will. So.
As Emily said, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What else comes up? Scott, did you read any of that paper at all?
No, I didn't have a chance yet. I downloaded it, and I like to print things out, and I was ordering more paper, and the paper just came in yesterday, so I got to print some things out.
Yeah, these 2-3 weeks will be really interesting for me because I got 3 papers coming out, you know, that have all been in the works for a while. One is the computational strata one. The second is I got another paper that was accepted in a different journal that actually looks at the implications for genetics, if you take the kind of model of light at the quantum level, what are the implications for genetics? So that paper is coming out as well, which will also be open access. And then I have a third paper that got accepted at an IEEE conference that I present next week. And that paper is my interpretation of Schrödinger's and Heisenberg's equations and how they impact quantum computation, how it would impact quantum computation differently based on my interpretation of what Schrödinger and Heisenberg might have meant in those equations. So again, I mean, it's interesting that all three of these kind of like coalesce in like a 2-week time frame, or just kind of pop up. But I'll see what kind of conversation or comments I get on it. But
it need to be 4 though, not 3.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you know, Anand, how are you doing? What's going on? Oh, can't hear you. You're mute.
Just listening in. I'm just a bit spacey because I just finished training 70 people.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I'm still arriving back on planet Earth.
Okay.
So give me a minute.
Sure.
What's the genetics paper about? I just went to 4 bases when you mentioned that, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it.
So I have a different view of how genetic code is actually generated, and it's based on the view. So if Natty mentioned, for example, earlier on when we started this call, that he liked that video that I posted on space-time energy gravity. So what I'm proposing is that space-time energy gravity is actually a 4-fold script that creates law at any level of granularity. So whether you're looking at the quantum level, or whether you're looking at the genetic level, or whether you're looking at the level of organization, of massive organization, you still require this 4-fold script to depict how things are going to operate practically. And space-time energy gravity are kind of the buckets in which that logic is specified. Okay, so essentially what I'm proposing is that all genetic script actually has space-time energy gravity components to it. And if you go down into the quantum level, what I'm proposing is that behind the quantum veil, all quote-unquote laws use space-time energy gravity to be written, and that kind of propagates up. So if you want to make a change genetically, then if you understand that what you're trying to do is manipulate space-time energy and gravity, then it offers you a different way to actually modify things genetically. And that's a proposal essentially. And there's kind of more precise ways to alter genetic code than, or to make genetic modifications based on this view that actually what you need to do is alter dynamics in space-time energy and gravity. So it's very much a fringe proposal, but the good news is that at least in a peer review it got accepted. So some academicians around the world bought into the idea. So. Right.
Well, you don't have to convince me that there are structures and principles beneath the chemical level that are kind of controlling the chemical level. So
yeah. Yeah. Perhaps you could say a little bit about structured water in that context again, because I think it kind of, and getting into structured water and light. And so.
Yeah, sure. So the way that I build up the logic for it, because it's kind of a jump for most people, and water memory has been a subject that's been vilified, many times over in mainstream scientific circles. But I was mentioning before the call, Gerald Pollack out of Washington State, or the University of Washington, he created this robust structure for what he called easy water, or exclusion zone water. which is a particular structured water that forms at interfacial or hydrophilic surfaces. And he measured the properties of the water to have about 10 times the viscosity of regular bulk water, and many different properties related to its conductivity and pH and things like that. And he proposed a lattice structure for this easy water, where if you added up the hydrogen and oxygen molecules, you got H3O2, which allowed for a free electron for every ring. And then, and you basically allow this kind of flexibility within this system, so that it can donate electrons to certain processes and even be able to kind of take in electrical information or information from light. That structure coincides with the work of Mei-Wan Ho and a guy named Emilio Del Giudice and his whole group out of Italy, somewhere in Italy. I don't remember the universities or whatever. And Mei-Wan Ho used a particular form of imaging where she was basically able to look at a fly larva as almost like a prism, and these bring out these birefringence patterns within the larva. And I mean, through the optical imaging, it looked like a rainbow. It was all these different colors within the fly larva, and it was because of the coherence in the water structure of the larva. And so over the years, she didn't know what she was looking at first, but over the years, she built this model of crystalline water and coherent structures for biological systems. Del Giudice brought in quantum electrodynamics into the picture, and they tested these biological, or they came up with the mathematics for looking at what they called CDs, or coherent domains, with millions of molecules of water, where they could determine that they could have coherence in this crystalline structure of water. And water's really interesting anyway because of all the anomalous properties that it has. So it makes sense based on how important water is to our biology. I mean, we're 70% water by mass, and 99% of the molecules in our body or so are water because of how small the water molecule is. It kind of just makes sense that it would have special properties for life. So if you think about water being able to form these crystalline lattices, they can basically provide a structure and carry electrical information with these free electrons for anything that could be happening within the body. And with these coherent domains, provide for simultaneous information transfer throughout the body. And I've read works where they even talk about how the DNA strands and proteins are surrounded by water. I mean, if you think about like the lock and key model of how proteins work or enzymes work, things just kind of bumping in until the proteins fit together. But it makes more sense that they're guided by electrical fields that are carried within the water that they're surrounded by in the cytoplasm and things like that. So there's also theories about cancer and how you can look at like cell voltage and the structure of water in cancer cells, and they basically have a breakdown in the structure of the water, so cellular processes can't happen the way that they should be happening. It's a fascinating subject, but yeah, there's a lot to think about with it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The one thing that struck me as you were speaking also is that, and is the fact that what's her name was Mei-Wan
Ho.
Mei-Wan Ho, yeah. So when she looked at the larva, and again, which larva was it?
I think it was a fruit fly.
Fruit fly. Okay.
Drosophila something, I don't know.
Yeah, but the fact that the rainbow indicated kind of like a coherent structure, which to me is interesting, because the other way around is that if you subject, for example, a cell with variation with that kind of bandwidth of light, where you're actually taking all the components of it, then does that in itself create coherence at the cellular level? But that's an interesting question, and I'm sure people have done some research on that. So,
yeah, and so what I got into all of this because of color chromotherapy, color light therapy, and trying to figure out how all of that worked. And this picture kind of made sense to me then. There's another, moving away from, well, actually, yeah, there's a couple more experiments related to water that are really interesting too. There's a guy named Luc Montagnier who won the Nobel Prize for sequencing the HIV virus back in the 70s. And he started doing a bunch of experiments with water and EMF and what kind of information water can carry. And he did two really interesting experiments. One of them, he had two vessels sealed off from each other. One of them had extremely diluted bacterial DNA, and the other one was just pure water. And they radiated the system with something like the Schumann resonance for 18 hours, and they were able to use PCR testing on the pure water and get a positive result for the original bacterial DNA. So something about that ambient electrical environment was able to enable the information to create the genetic sequence in the pure water, without anything actually being passed. And then later on, they showed that they used RNA, but RNA sequences were able to actually gave off their own electrical signals, their own EMF that could imprint pure water. And then when the components were added to the water, they were able to form into the structure of the RNA. So just like really, really fascinating things about,
that also what occurs to me, and here I want to open it out to everybody, is that I think that it's not necessary even to actually use instrumentation to create a certain field, even at the micro level. I think that the power of imagination, for example, if we can visualize pretty concretely like a sphere of light, or a light penetrating into a certain parts of our body and going down to the cellular level, I'm guessing that would have a similar impact, that an actual electric field that you're generating to create a shift at the cellular level can have. But I'd like to open it out. I mean, so what do you all think? Do you think that visualization of light, so just in yourself being able to generate or see light in a certain way, and then moving that light around, can it actually have an effect on the areas that you move it to?
I talk about this a little bit. I mean, we all know we can look at things like the placebo effect or the power of positive thinking, and that our mental state and our beliefs have repercussions in the physical changes that can happen in our body. Bruce Lipton has done a lot of work on that and wrote the book The Biology of Belief. But there's also some experiments that really specifically measure human intention within a chemical system, and show that just through our intention we can have changes on the the structure of certain things. So there was William Tiller did experiments where they were able to raise the pH of a water solution by 1, just with intention, or lower it by 1, just with their intention. If you can lower the pH of an external solution with just through intention by 1, what kind of power could you have within your own body, just with intention? And then you think about too, like, you know, we can't measure these things. Probably we don't know how thought is creating these changes, but there must be something that ties it into light, and the electrical nature of our bodies, and the way that information is communicated. That and I've heard that there's speculation in some models that thought is actually some kind of scalar, create some kind of scalar information or scalar energy that then can have an impact in what actually we see. But it's interesting to think about, you know, what might that mechanism be that our thought and our intention has, and it has to be related to light. Yeah.
You know, I believe that thought and intention do play a huge part in people's health and longevity and well-being. My younger brother's grandfather was a overall healthy guy. He walked 5 miles a day. He was 88 years old. He was doing great. Every morning he would get up, put his gloves on, and go for a walk, and he'd be gone all day long. And then one day he went to the hospital for a checkup, and they said, "Oh no, Mr. Walker, we're so surprised that you're even standing here. You are gravely ill." And he heard them say that he was gravely ill, and he died like 48 hours later. It was just the craziest thing, because I would never have even, I mean, just that morning he did his 5 miles, right? So I mean, it was really surprising to me that the power of them telling him that to him, I mean, maybe it was coincidence, but I really felt like had no one ever said that to him, maybe he would have kept going.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. Yeah.
This is very interesting for me as the ultimate layperson here listening. And it's so inspiring and beautiful, the work that you guys are doing. And very transparently, I do not understand most of the words that have come out of your mouth, but it is very, very interesting to see the work that's being put forth towards this, and like the thought behind it. It's just, but I go back and I do look all these words up, just so you guys all know that.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily. Yeah. No, I know.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. No, at Zappos, you were one of the people who probably engaged in that whole light series the most. So. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it a lot, and it made sense when you break it down to more palatable bites. I'm like, oh, those things make sense. Like you were talking about quantum genetics and how you can affect change in genetics, and it sounds like what you were saying is that you're proposing that you can more, by making the change the way that you're suggesting, that you're able to make the change more safely without creating too much of a rift. It's like it's a fix along the way, so that all of the pieces are fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think
evenly.
Yes,
so you're not just like popping one thing in and it's like,
right.
Ta-da, now we have this new genetic fix, but you're making a more even fix to the whole structure.
Yes. There's a lot of work to be done, but the core idea is something like that. And I think there's a lot of experimentation, but yes, that's it. That's the core idea there. Yeah.
I love it.
Great. Anand?
I think just bridging this, the idea of intention in health, and bringing it back to maybe the more ordinary. So if you walk down the street and someone stops you and swears at you, then our body releases chemicals that it wasn't releasing before. So it's a real physiological effect when you have different kind of thoughts and feelings. But also we don't know how much the body can sort itself out. So we've got one of the women on last year's program, and she's been diabetic for decades and working with Western doctors, because the danger of this is magical thinking, right? That it bridges over into magical thinking. And so during the course of the year, we kind of helped. I mean, she had some pretty horrible stuff, attempted suicide and rape and all kinds of things. So she's trying to heal herself for the last 30 or 40 years. And using all these modern trauma resolution techniques, we were able to kind of help her to clear all that up. And she had an awakening, some form of kind of realizing her Buddha nature or true nature. So she says, I'm not the same person, so I don't have the same conditions. And when she's had the same consultant for 16 years, and they say all of the antibodies that are essentially fighting her own body are all gone, right? So her insulin, under the guidance of a Western doctor, her insulin levels have gone down 2/3. They've taken them down from 12 units to 4 units. They can't really understand what's going on, so she's been referred to I can't remember the name of it. It's a university in Texas. I was trying to look it up, couldn't find it, where they study people that quote unquote heal from seemingly incurable things, but just correlation is not causation, that thing, right? So we don't know when you clean up certain traumas and have awakenings whether the body just kicks in its healing process and goes, okay, now that disturbance is not there anymore, I can go back to producing insulin. So it's kind of, the danger is magical thinking, but I like the fact that this woman, she's not running away from her Western doctors. She's working with the consultant. They're doing tangible checks to see that, and we still don't know if it's because of the stuff we did, but I do imagine that if you remove a whole bunch of traumas from the body, then it can do things that isn't magical. It's just you remove the disturbance, and therefore it can reorganize itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can come back to this notion of magical, but I wanted to check in with Natty if there was thoughts around this idea of intention, or whether you've experienced something with the visualizations or anything that related to that.
So a question, not just a question.
Yeah.
So all the time we are being impacted by energy that goes through us, true? Whether it's coming from the sun or from other. So when this energy passes through me and goes to my wife, that's what you refer as the impact? So like you're saying that you don't need to do anything to create an impact between the water with the DNA and the water without the DNA, because external energy that comes through will do the magic for you? That was your comment, or I didn't?
My comment was the one discussion we were having with Scott, but are you referring to something that I said? And then
So when you told Scott, that you said that not necessarily you need an external, like an intentional force. So, but you need to be any force, because it's not just happening by itself. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Did you refer to external forces that come from the sun or whatsoever, galaxies or whatsoever, or?
Yeah, no. So as with anything, it's there has to be a certain level of mastery, a certain level of practice. For example, to lift a weight, you've got to be able to develop a muscle in order to do that effectively. And so even in the act of visualization, it depends. It would vary from person to person, but it's certainly, I think, possible that if one were to put oneself in a certain state, if one could do that and open oneself to more generative energies, which I think is also possible, then one can become, in a sense, a fulcrum or a conduit for that energy to flow in a certain kind of way. And visualization, if done a certain way, I would propose is like a part of a circuit in a sense, because it's taking a possibility, it's building it, and it's passing it on. And in one way of looking at it, what really is the difference between an electrical device and something that we generate with our minds? You know, in my perception, that difference is perhaps not that great, because the sophistication and the ability that's packed into any human being, because of, you know, certainly, even if we think about the tremendous complexity that makes us up, you know, starting from, we have a whole, you know, world within us. And if you look at the order of magnitude between the Planck scale and the dimension of the universe, the human being sits right in the middle in terms of the size and the complexity. And so what I'm saying is that there's a lot more to us than we might give ourselves credit for. And there's a lot of ways to become intentional devices to make change happen. But it's not a random thing. There has to be practice. There has to be, you've got to be able to do it, you know, day after day, and then it would become effective.
There's
so,
yeah. So in some of the martial kind of inner traditions, inner chi and developing those things, they would say that at a certain point, just thinking something or intending doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't affect. Yeah, exactly. But what has to happen is the self system has to realize its unity with existence, or the larger system first. Then when you ping, quote unquote, the outside, because it's not the outside, now it's all you, then there's a two-way communication happening. But until, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a specific kind of tipping point when you can actually do something real in the universe using intention or will. You know, all Western occult magic is based on that idea that when you develop your will and your intention, then you can bring about magical change in the universe. What is it? What did Crowley say? In conformity with it, magic is change in conformity with will, or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But it doesn't. There's a magical thinking, and then there's a genuine bending of reality.
Sure. So one of the ideas of light, you know, if we think about light as existing at multiple possible layers, and we're saying that light traveling infinitely fast basically encompasses or engulfs everything. And we're saying because the nature of light is one, and it's ubiquitous, even physically, you know, forget about light traveling infinitely fast. But even in our universe, if we think about it more critically, light is ubiquitous. It animates everything. It connects everything. And without it, nothing would really be able to sustain itself. Because the nature of light might be one, then if we can contact light within ourselves, which should be amongst one of the easiest things to do because it's ubiquitous and because we're fundamentally made from it, then it's possible, and this is a framework, you know, of course, any framework requires work, but it's possible to, because of that oneness in the nature, to then go to this other level that operates differently. So let's assume this layer of where light's traveling infinitely fast and where everything is instantaneously connected to everything else. And then perhaps you would have more power in the kind of intentionality you conceived or in your visualizations and so on. But, one really interesting thing was that, so the data point is not that broad, but I had about 30 plus, I'd say more than that, like maybe 65 or 70 light workshops in the course of 1 year when I was at Zappos. I'd have like 2 to 3 a week over there, roughly, and people who had never been exposed to the idea of light. The interesting thing was that many of them reported a similar experience, or they would describe what happened to them similarly when they began to play around with it during the course of like a 2.5 hour workshop, which to me suggests that, again, it's kind of like a reinforcement of this universality. And if you tap into it, you're going to experience something because that's the way it, quote unquote, works. But again, you've got to tap into it.
I mean, there's all sorts of meditations, I guess, for pineal gland activation and claims of what that does. What's the other one? Pineal and
the pituitary.
Yeah, that one. I don't know how to say it. Pituitary gland.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting about this, we actually kind of got here at the end of the last podcast episode is, and we talked about like the internal martial arts masters or qigong masters, and you can actually measure the excess light generated from their bodies, or seemingly at least in a controlled fashion. I guess I'll take one step and build this up. I saw an article the other day of how we can use the infrared light that comes from our hands in specific applications for decryption or some kind of basic mechanical applications. And so that's just like, I mean, everybody's hands are emitting infrared through heat, infrared light photons. We have biophotons too in varying frequencies, and plants emit biophotons. That was a guy named Gerwich studied that 100 years ago, and blocked off the communication between plants, and they weren't able to respond in a specific way. But so Anand mentioned how you need to sort of get into this state where you have this oneness, or I've heard it referred to as like an over unity or something, where you can actually then tap into this power to control or have intention actually control something in the physical reality. And I proposed that, is it possible that we have an unconscious part of us that is doing that actually all the time, that it takes training to actually become aware of it and consciously control it, but are there unconscious aspects of us connected to this unity that are actually light encoding our reality all the time?
I think so. That's why when Zen teachers say the realization, when you realize your true self, you don't get anything, it's because you always had it. You just realize it. Yeah. By the way, this is an image from what Scott was saying of my energy healer in London, Seika Nikolic, and they did some tests on her hands, so that's in the images. And they unfortunately their scale wasn't big enough, so they had to add onto the scale in order to include where she was on the scale.
Okay, hold on. Maybe you can speak a little bit more.
Is that Kirlian photography?
I haven't actually looked at how. Yeah,
so
I haven't looked at how they've done it. But I have experienced her subtle energy capacities, and they are very, 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 very strong, and she kind of has to tone it down, otherwise she would fry people.
What's interesting about that, I think it's probably using this method called Kirlian photography. The chromotherapy that I became fascinated with, and that kind of spawned all of this for me, is called color puncture, and it was developed by this German guy, Peter Mandel. And he used like 900,000 different Kirlian photographs of people's hands with different conditions, and mapped how their light emissions corresponded to their physical their physical level health problems, and sort of found patterns in every person, so that he basically created then a map of the hands or the feet, and could tell by reading someone's imprint, like a light emissions, then through this Kirlian photography, what might be wrong with their physical system. And he created this map by just doing it over and over and over again with real life cases, and that's how he developed this light healing system.
That's awesome. And that's the one that you're kind of following now, the puncture.
Yeah.
I think we just it depends, you know, the accuracy of, I really like Barbara Brennan had a school which basically trained people in subtle energies, or had a school, maybe she sold it now, and she was a NASA scientist, and I like the fact that she had a very disciplined approach to people training their nervous systems to be able to essentially become medical intuitives, so to read where people have got disturbances in their body, and it's a trainable skill, I think. And the test is not whether the model is correct, but when you use it, do people, you know, when you say to somebody they're on Zoom, right, and you go, no, don't tense your legs, relax your legs, and they go, how did you know my legs were tense? Right? Because if you're empathic and you've kind of broken down this barrier of a separate self, then you can feel those things. It's not a big deal.
Right.
It's also not a good idea if the person's very ill.
Yeah, probably not, because there's always an exchange of information and energy.
Yeah.
But
I can't read Italian, but there's some detail here about what this thing actually is on the website.
Yeah. I want to kind of just be respectful of the time and bring this discussion to an end. So we have another minute and a half if anybody would like to say anything, and we can wrap up. So any concluding comments, please go ahead, the floor is yours, and then we can wrap it up.
This was a lot of fun. I have a call at 3, but yeah, this was great.
I think it's just approaching skepticism carefully. So on that call I was on, we did a transgenerational energy clearing, right? But the way I phrase it to them, some of them are like, right, great, let's do it. Other people I say, it sort of doesn't matter if this is real or not, because when I say these words, something happens in your body. And if those responses are disturbances and we resolve those, then we know that your system is becoming more resilient. So in which case, if you want to treat it as a metaphor, that's okay too. And you know, one person had a realization of, when we did the mother line, the father line, she goes, oh my God, I'm living out the dynamic between my inner conflict is the dynamic of the conflict of my mum and dad. So the fact that she had that epiphany or realization, to me, the energy stuff is happening, but the test is, does someone's life get better and do they get happier?
Oh, okay. Thank you all very much for joining and for your contributions. And perhaps we'll see you the next time then. Okay. All right.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.